Just look at her, fresh off the bus from officer school. Probably got the slot because of a diversity quota. She'll be the first one to freeze when the shooting starts, a liability waiting to happen. The crowd of hardened Marines chuckled, the sound dry and brittle in the oppressive heat of the Afghan forward operating base. The man who spoke, Gunnery Sergeant Rex Thorne, was a mountain of a man, his voice a gravelly proclamation that carried across the dusty motor pool. His words were aimed like a weapon at the lone figure working quietly by a stack of Pelican cases, Lieutenant Anya Sharma. She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. Her hands, small and precise, continued their methodical work, disassembling and cleaning the bolt carrier group of her M4 rifle with a practiced economy of motion that was almost hypnotic. The laughter of the men, a chorus of casual cruelty and ingrained skepticism, washed over her without leaving a mark, like water off polished steel. But when the base commander, Colonel Davies, saw her from the window of the command post, he didn't see a green lieutenant. He saw the way she held the weapon, not like a tool, but like an extension of her own body. He saw the impossible calm in her posture amidst the open mockery, a stillness that was more profound than any shouted retort. It was a silence he hadn't seen in 20 years, not since a shadowed operation in the Hindu Kush where he'd witnessed a ghost team move through hellfire with that same unnerving peace. He saw a professional. If you believe that true strength is measured not in words, but in actions, type competence below. The FOB was an island of sandbags and HESCO barriers in a sea of ochre-colored dust, a place where the air itself seemed weary of the perpetual conflict. For Gunny Thorne, this outpost was his kingdom, and he ruled it with a fist of iron and a voice of thunder. He saw the world in simple, brutal terms. There were assets and there were liabilities. Experience was the only currency that mattered, and in his eyes, Lieutenant Sharma was bankrupt. He made it his personal mission to remind everyone of this fact. He'd walk past her as she calibrated the long-range comms array, muttering just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hope you know which button calls for mommy, ma'am." When she spent her evenings in the makeshift gym, methodically working through a grueling calisthenics routine that left larger men gasping, he'd stand in the doorway, arms crossed, and sneer, "Shadowboxing won't stop a bullet, Lieutenant." His campaign of derision was relentless, a daily barrage of casual insults designed to erode her confidence and affirm his dominance. He saw her small stature, her Ivy League education noted in her file, her gender, and he compiled them into a verdict of incompetence. The other Marines, most of them young and impressionable, followed his lead. They saw her quiet dedication as weakness, her silence as fear. They gave her the coldest coffee, the worst duty rosters, and the widest berth. She was an outsider, a ghost in their midst, defined not by who she was, but by their collective assumption of what she was not. Through it all, Sharma remained a fixed point of calm in a swirling vortex of prejudice. Her response to the constant provocations was a profound and unnerving silence. She simply did her job. Her gear was always immaculate. Her reports were flawless. Her physical fitness scores were quietly, almost impossibly, at the top of the charts. Every task she undertook was completed with a serene, focused precision that was its own form of defiance. It was a competence so deep and so ingrained that it required no audience and no applause. While Thorne and his followers were loud, their boots scuffing clouds of dust as they postured and boasted, Sharma moved with a deliberate grace. Her footsteps left minimal trace. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and direct, usually limited to "yes, Gunny," or "understood, sir." This very economy of existence infuriated Thorne. It was a language he didn't understand. He mistook her discipline for subservience, her calm for fragility. He did not realize he was shouting at a mountain, mistaking its silence for submission, unaware of the tectonic power that lay dormant beneath the serene surface. He was judging the weapon by its silent casing, utterly ignorant of the meticulously engineered lethality contained within. Her silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was the silence of the hunter, the strategist, the professional who knows that the most important battles are won not with the mouth, but with the mind and the unwavering steadiness of the hand. This quiet ritual of competence continued, a silent argument against the loud chorus of doubt. While the others saw a liability, she was methodically, silently, becoming the base's most unacknowledged and underestimated asset. Every cleaned rifle, every calibrated radio, every grueling workout was another round chambered, another skill honed, waiting for the inevitable moment when assumptions would collide with the brutal, unforgiving reality of combat. The sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the corrugated tin roofs of the barracks and turning the air into a shimmering haze. The day had settled into the monotonous rhythm of deployed life. The drone of a generator, the distant crackle of radio chatter, the shouted jokes of bored Marines. It was a fragile peace, the kind that always felt like the deep breath before a plunge. Gunny Thorne was holding court near the armory, his voice booming as he critiqued a young Marine's firing stance. His lecture a familiar mix of bravado and genuine, if crudely delivered, tactical advice. Lieutenant Sharma was nearby, conducting a routine inventory of medical supplies, her movements as fluid and efficient as always. She counted bandages, checked morphine expiration dates, and organized combat application tourniquets with the focused attachment of a surgeon. Thorne, spotting her, couldn't resist another jab. "Hey, Lieutenant, make sure you stock up on smelling salts for yourself. Wouldn't want you to faint when things get loud." The predictable snickers followed. It was in that exact moment that the world tore itself apart. The first mortar round landed with a deafening, gut-punching crump, not outside the wire, but squarely in the center of the motor pool, 50 meters away. The explosion was a physical thing, a wave of pressure and sound that knocked men off their feet and sent a geyser of sand, metal, and fire into the sky. A second round hit the mess hall, a third slammed into the perimeter wall near the east gate. Then, from 3 directions at once, the air was ripped to shreds by the interlocking chatter of heavy machine guns. It was a coordinated, complex attack designed for maximum chaos and shock. For a heartbeat, there was only stunned silence, the ringing in everyone's ears, and the sudden, acrid smell of burnt propellant. Then, the screaming started. Panic, for a moment, was king. Marines scrambled for cover, their movements jerky and desperate. The carefully constructed edifice of bravado and routine shattered into a million pieces. Gunny Thorne, for all his bluster, was a product of his training. He bellowed orders, "Get to the bunkers. Return fire. Sector 3 is taking contact." He was loud, he was aggressive, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something he would never admit. The overwhelming shock of a perfectly executed ambush. Amidst this maelstrom of terror and confusion, Lieutenant Sharma moved. While others were reacting to the chaos, she seemed to be flowing through it, a study in lethal grace. There was no hesitation, no fear. Her inventory list was dropped, and in its place was the M4 she always kept within arm's reach. As she moved toward the sounds of the heaviest fighting, the narrator could have described each action as a verse in a poem of violence. The click of the safety selector switching from safe to semi-automatic. The smooth, practiced motion of chambering around. The way her eyes scanned the battlefield, not in a frantic search for cover, but in a cold, analytical sweep, processing angles, threats, and opportunities. She wasn't just another soldier caught in a storm. She was the storm's calm, calculating center. Her movements were a direct, physical refutation of every insult Thorne had ever leveled against her. He had called her weak. She moved with the coiled, explosive power of a predator. He had said she would freeze. She was the only one moving with absolute purpose. He had called her a liability. She was already identifying the enemy's primary axis of advance, her mind working several steps ahead of everyone else's. The battle was just beginning, but for anyone watching closely, the verdict was already in. Competence had entered the arena, and it was utterly, terrifyingly silent. The attack intensified, a symphony of destruction played with mortars, RPGs, and the relentless hammering of machine gun fire. The eastern perimeter wall, weakened by direct mortar hit, crumbled, and through the breach poured a wave of insurgents, their shouts of Allahu Akbar cutting through the din. This was the critical moment, the turning point where defense could collapse into a rout. Gunny Thorne and his fire team were the closest to the breach, and they met the charge with a wall of lead. But they were outnumbered and brutally suppressed. An RPG slammed into the sandbag position just above Thorne's head, showering him with debris and stunning him. His M249 squad automatic weapon was knocked from his grasp, its barrel bent and useless. Pinned down, his ears ringing, Thorne saw the enemy fighters closing in, their movements agile and confident. For the first time in his decorated career, raw, undiluted fear coiled in his gut. His bravado was gone, replaced by the grim certainty of being overrun. It was then that he saw her. Lieutenant Sharma appeared as if from nowhere, moving in a low crouch along the base of the shattered wall. She wasn't charging or screaming. She was flowing, a ghost in the swirling dust and smoke. She reached a firing position behind a burned-out Humvee, a perfect flanking angle on the insurgents pouring through the breach. What happened next defied belief. It wasn't the frantic spray and pray of a panicked soldier. It was a clinic in marksmanship, a display of precision so profound it was almost artistic. Pop! A rifleman at the front of the enemy charge dropped, a neat hole appearing in the center of his chest. Pop, pop. Two more fell, their advance halting in confusion. She wasn't just shooting, she was dismantling the attack. Her rifle seemed to be an extension of her will, each shot a deliberate, calculated solution to a tactical problem. She fired, moved to a new piece of cover, fired again. Her movements were economical, wasting no energy, exposing herself for no more than a fraction of a second. She saw a wounded Marine, Private Miller, lying exposed, a piece of shrapnel in his leg. While still laying down suppressive fire, she low-crawled to him, her medical kit already in her hand. With a calm that bordered on supernatural, she applied a tourniquet high on his thigh, cinching it tight with practiced, efficient motions, all while rounds snapped and whizzed inches above her head. She packed his wound, gave him a reassuring nod, and was back in the fight. The command post had taken a direct hit, and communications across the FOB were down. Chaos was threatening to consume them. Sharma, recognizing this, saw the comms bunker, its main antenna sheared off by shrapnel. She knew there was a backup transceiver inside, but it had to be manually configured. Without a word, she broke from her cover, sprinting across a 50-meter open space that was being chewed up by machine gun fire. Dirt kicked up around her feet as bullets chased her, but she moved in an unpredictable, weaving pattern, making herself an impossible target. She slammed into the bunker, her hands flying across the radio console. Frequencies, encryption keys, call signs, she navigated the complex interface with the ease of a concert pianist. Within 30 seconds, her calm, clear voice cut through the static on the command net. All call signs, this is Echo Actual. East wall is breached. All available elements. Shift fire to grid coordinate 479. I'm directing fires. Over. There was no title, no Lieutenant Sharma, just a call sign and a voice of absolute authority. The effect was instantaneous. The scattered, panicked defense suddenly had a nerve center. Fire teams began shifting their fields of fire, guided by her precise, emotionless corrections. Gunny Thorne, shaking off the effects of the blast, could only stare in disbelief. The Green Lieutenant, the liability, was single-handedly holding the line, treating the wounded, and commanding the entire base's defense. The arrogance on his face had been sandblasted away, replaced by a raw, uncomprehending awe. The impossible had happened, and it had happened in a blur of silent, deadly competence. The counterattack, guided by Sharma's dispassionate voice on the radio, was swift and brutal. Reinforcements, directed with pinpoint precision, converged on the breach, catching the now disorganized enemy fighters in a devastating crossfire. The tide of the battle turned not with a roar, but with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine that had suddenly found its gear. Within 10 minutes, the last of the attackers inside the wire were neutralized, and the incoming fire from outside dwindled to sporadic, inaccurate bursts before ceasing altogether. A deafening silence fell over the FOB, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of burning debris. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smoke of explosives. Marines emerged from their positions, their faces blackened with soot, their eyes wide with a mixture of relief and disbelief. They had survived, but the fight had been closer than any of them had ever experienced. Gunny Thorne stood near the breach, his useless saw still slung over his shoulder. He looked at the bodies of the enemy fighters, then at the handful of his own wounded being tended to by corpsmen. He looked at the shattered wall and the pockmarked buildings. He had been loud. He had been aggressive. And he had almost been overrun. Then he saw Lieutenant Sharma. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't seeking congratulations. She was kneeling beside Private Miller, the young Marine she had saved, checking the tourniquet and speaking to him in a low, reassuring voice. Her rifle was laid carefully beside her, not discarded, but placed with reverence. Her face was smudged with dirt, but her eyes were clear and calm, still scanning, still assessing. There was no trace of adrenaline-fueled excitement, only the quiet focus of a professional who had just finished a difficult job. The silence that followed the battle was different from the silence that preceded it. It was heavy with unspoken questions. The Marines who had once snickered at her now watched her with a new, uncertain respect. They had all seen it. They had all heard her on the radio. They had witnessed something that their minds were still struggling to process. The woman they had dismissed as a paper pusher, a diversity hire, had just fought with the skill and cold-blooded calm of a seasoned special operator. She had not only saved the line, she had become the line. The assumptions that had defined her for weeks had been violently and irrevocably shattered, replaced by an undeniable truth written in spent cartridges and saved lives. The FOB was in a state of controlled chaos, with medical teams rushing to the triage point and damage control parties assessing the destruction. A pair of attack helicopters now circled overhead, their presence a comforting reassurance against a follow-up assault. Into this scene of organized recovery walked Colonel Davies. He emerged from the main command bunker, his face a grim mask of authority. He didn't shout or demand answers. He simply walked, his strides long and purposeful, his eyes taking in every detail of the defense. His gaze swept over the stunned Marines, the humbled Gunny Thorne, and finally settled on Lieutenant Sharma, who was now helping a corpsman apply a pressure dressing. He walked directly to her, ignoring everyone else. The small crowd of Marines parted before him, their conversations falling silent. This was a moment of reckoning. Colonel Davies stopped a few feet from her. He didn't look at the wounded private or the carnage around them. He looked at Sharma. Specifically, he looked at how she had repositioned her rifle into a low-ready carry, a specific, aggressive posture favored by Tier 1 units, subtly different from the standard Marine Corps manual of arms. It was a small detail, a piece of muscle memory that only an expert would recognize. Echo actual, the colonel said, his voice quiet but carrying with absolute authority. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of recognition. Sharma stopped what she was doing and slowly rose to her feet. She met the colonel's gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Yes, sir, Gunny Thorne, standing nearby, felt a cold dread wash over him. Echo, it wasn't a standard radio call sign. It was a name, a legend whispered in hushed tones in the intelligence community, a ghost credited with impossible missions in places that didn't officially exist. Davies turned his head slightly, his eyes locking onto Thorne. The colonel's voice was low, but it cut through the air like a razor. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, he began, for the past 6 weeks, you have seen a first lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. You have seen her gender. You have seen her size. You have seen her Ivy League degree. You have seen everything you wanted to see, everything your prejudice allowed you to see. He paused, letting the words hang in the smoky air. What you failed to see, he continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a steel blade of condemnation, was your own ignorance. He raised his hand and pointed not at Sharma, but at the digital tablet in his aide's hand. Pull up her file. The real 1-inch, the aide tapped the screen, and the colonel took the tablet, turning it for Thorne to see. The gunnery sergeant's eyes widened in shock, his face paling beneath the grime. The narrator would list the credentials like a drumbeat of vindication. Name, Anya Sharma. Rank, Lieutenant, USMC. Previous service branch, United States Navy. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The unit more commonly known as SEAL Team 6. Status, Active Duty Liaison. Assigned to USMC for integration of special operations tactics at the platoon level. Combat déploiement classified. Special skills. Advanced close quarters battle. High threat environment SEER instructor. Tier 1 combat medic. Master breacher. The list went on. A litany of elite qualifications that made Thorne's own distinguished career look like a child summer camp. The final entry was a single, heavily redacted commendation for direct action during Operation Nightfall. Serpent Thorne could only stare, his mouth agape. The woman he had relentlessly mocked, the officer he had dismissed as a liability, was not just a quiet professional. She was one of the most elite, highly trained, and combat-proven warriors on the entire planet. The colonel took the tablet back and turned to face Lieutenant Sharma. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a handshake. He did something far more profound. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and rendered a slow, perfect formal salute. It was not the salute of a superior officer to a subordinate. It was the salute of one warrior acknowledging another, a gesture of absolute and profound respect that transcended rank and service branch. "Ma'am," Colonel Davies said, the single word an official and public reversal of every insult she had endured. "Your defense of this position was exemplary. Welcome to the unit." The silence from the surrounding Marines was now one of pure, unadulterated awe. The mystery of the quiet lieutenant was solved, and the truth was more staggering than any of them could have possibly imagined. The story of what happened at FOB Dagger spread like wildfire, carried on the encrypted radio waves and the hushed conversations of men who had witnessed the impossible. It became more than just an after-action report. It transformed into a legend, a piece of institutional folklore. In the chow hall, young Marines would point to the patched-up wall and call it Echo's Corner. They would recount the story to newcomers, the details growing more mythic with each telling. How she took on 20 insurgents by herself, how she directed air strikes from a broken radio while performing surgery, how bullets seemed to bend around her. The legend of the quiet lieutenant who fought like a seal became a cautionary tale against the sin of assumption. It was a story about how the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield is often the one you underestimate. The impact on Gunny Thorne was the most profound. The event had not just humbled him. It had fundamentally broken down and rebuilt his entire worldview. The rigid, prejudiced framework through which he saw the world had been shattered by the undeniable reality of Sharma's competence. A few days after the attack, he found her on the firing range, where she was patiently coaching a young Marine on proper sight alignment. Thorne waited, standing at a respectful distance, until she was finished. He approached her not with his usual swagger, but with the hesitant, heavy steps of a man carrying a great weight. "Ma'am," he began, his gravelly voice uncharacteristically subdued. He couldn't quite meet her eyes. I was wrong. About everything." He took a deep breath. "What I said, how I acted, it was unprofessional. It was ignorant. There's no excuse for it. I apologize. It was a simple, direct admission, stripped of all ego." For a man like Thorne, those words were harder to say than charging a machine gun nest. Lieutenant Sharma looked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer platitudes or easy forgiveness. She simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Apology accepted, Gunnery Sergeant." Then she did something unexpected. "Your men fought well," she said, her voice even. "But their fire movement drills are sloppy. They bunch up under fire. We can fix that." It wasn't an accusation. It was an offer. It was the act of a true professional, focusing not on the past insult, but on the future mission. Thorne looked up, a flicker of his old self returning, but this time tempered with respect. "When do we start, ma'am?" The training sessions that followed became legendary in their own right. Sharma was not a loud instructor. She didn't scream or berate. She taught by demonstration. She would run a live-fire drill herself, her movements so fluid, so efficient, so lethally precise, that the Marines would watch in silent awe. She broke down complex tactics into simple, understandable principles. She taught them how to think, how to anticipate, how to move as a single, intelligent organism. She taught them the philosophy of the quiet professional, that economy of motion, economy of words, and absolute precision were the keys to survival. She wasn't just teaching them to fight. She was teaching them a new way of being. Thorne became her most devoted student, absorbing every lesson with a convert's zeal. He saw in her methods the antidote to his own loud, brute force approach. The transformation was remarkable. The platoon, once defined by its leader's arrogant bluster, became known for its quiet, methodical deadliness. They were calmer, faster, and more effective than ever before. The legend of Lieutenant Sharma was no longer just a story about a single battle. It was a living, breathing legacy embodied in the newfound competence of the very men who had once written her off. A month after the attack, a small, unofficially stenciled sign appeared on the new concrete of Echo's Corner. It didn't mention her name or rank. It just had a single word, painted in black. Listen. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important lessons come from the quietest voices, and that true strength doesn't need to announce its presence. It simply waits to be revealed. Months bled into a year. The dust of FOB dagger settled. But the changes that had been forged in the crucible of that one brutal attack became permanent fixtures of the unit's culture. The platoon that Lieutenant Sharma had mentored, with Gunny Thorne as its newly enlightened senior NCO, became the standard by which all others were measured. Their operational readiness reports were flawless. Their casualty rates in subsequent engagements were non-existent. They moved with a quiet confidence that was the envy of the entire battalion. The story of Echo's Corner was now part of the official training for every new Marine arriving in theater. It was no longer gossip, it was doctrine. Newcomers would be taken to the patched-up wall, and a seasoned sergeant, often Thorne himself, would tell the story. He would never spare his own role in it, using his past arrogance as the ultimate teaching point. "I looked at her," he would say to the wide-eyed young Marines, his voice now calm and measured, "and I saw a woman, a small officer, a bookworm. I saw everything but the warrior. My assumptions almost got my entire team killed. Her competence saved our lives. Never, ever judge a person by the cover a prejudiced mind puts on them. Look for the proof. Look for the action. Look for the silence where others are loud." The legacy of Anya Sharma was not a plaque on a wall or a medal on a uniform. It was in the way a Marine now instinctively checked his fields of fire. It was in the calm, steady hands of a corpsman under pressure. It was in the respectful silence that fell over the Chow Hall when a new female officer walked in. She had changed the DNA of the unit, replacing the virus of prejudice with the unshakable principle of demonstrated worth. She herself was long gone, reassigned to another classified corner of the world, her work at the FOB complete. She had left as quietly as she had arrived, with no fanfare and no goodbyes. Her file was once again sealed, her presence fading back into the shadowy world from which she came. But she had left behind more than just a memory. She had planted a seed of professionalism that had grown into a mighty tree, providing shade and strength for all who served under it. The final, enduring lesson was not about combat tactics or marksmanship. It was about the profound power of humility. It was the understanding that true strength isn't about having all the answers, but about being willing to recognize it in others, especially when it appears in a form you don't expect. The quiet professional had come and gone, but her silence echoed forever in the newfound competence and character of the men and women she had saved, not just from the enemy, but from their own ignorance. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in stories and medals. It's what continues forward in the actions of those you inspired. For more stories where competence triumphs over arrogance and where quiet professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.